Have you ever heard of a man who crowned himself emperor? Who redrew the map of Europe and whose legal code is still in use today? This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, a figure so monumental, so brilliant, so ambitious, that he became a legend in his own lifetime. But it's also the story of how that same brilliance, that same unstoppable ambition, ultimately led to his own spectacular downfall. It's a tale of a genius who, in the end, doomed himself. So, how did a boy from the small island of Corsica, speaking French with a thick accent, rise to become the master of Europe? It all started with a bang, literally. During the French Revolution, the old world was crumbling. For a young, talented artillery officer like Napoleon, chaos was a ladder. He first made a name for himself at the Siege of Toulon, where his strategic genius in placing artillery forced the British to retreat. Suddenly, everyone in Paris was talking about this young Bonaparte. His star rose meteorically. He was a whirlwind on the battlefield, leading his armies to stunning victories in Italy and Egypt. His tactics were revolutionary. He moved his troops with incredible speed, concentrating his forces to strike at the enemy's weakest point before they even knew what was happening. He inspired fanatical loyalty in his men. They called him the Little Corporal and would follow him anywhere. He wasn't just a general, he was a phenomenon. Back in France, the government was a mess. People were tired of instability. They craved a strong leader. And Napoleon, fresh from his military triumphs, was more than happy to oblige. In 1799, in a daring political move known as a coup d'etat, he seized power. He didn't just walk into power, he took it. He established a new government, the consulate, with himself as first consul. For all intents and purposes, he was the ruler of France. As first consul, Napoleon proved he was more than just a military genius. He was also a brilliant administrator. He centralized the government, reformed the banking system, and overhauled education. And most famously, he created the Napoleonic Code. This was a complete overhaul of the French legal system, establishing principles like equality before the law and the right to property. It was so revolutionary and so effective that it was adopted by dozens of other countries and still influences legal systems around the world today. He was building a modern France from the ashes of the Revolution. But for a man like Napoleon, being first consul of France wasn't enough. His ambition was boundless. In 1804, in a magnificent ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral, he did something unprecedented. With the Pope watching, he took the crown and placed it on his own head. Then, he crowned his wife, Josephine, as Empress. The message was clear. His power came from himself, not from God, not from anyone else. The French Republic was over. The French Empire had begun, and Emperor Napoleon was its absolute master. As emperor, Napoleon's military campaigns reached a new level of audacity. He was the chess master of Europe, and its kingdoms were his pawns. The Battle of Austerlitz in 1805 is perhaps his masterpiece. Outnumbered, he tricked the Austrian and Russian armies into attacking his supposedly weak right flank. It was a trap. As they advanced, Napoleon smashed through their center, splitting their forces and achieving a decisive, legendary victory. Victories like this at Jena, at Wagram, made him seem invincible. He installed his relatives on the thrones of Spain, Holland, and Italy. The Napoleonic Empire stretched from the coast of Spain to the borders of Russia. But here, at the very peak of his power, we begin to see the seeds of his downfall. The same qualities that made him great, his ambition, his self-confidence, his refusal to accept limits, started to work against him. He believed he was invincible, that his destiny was to rule. He couldn't tolerate any rivals. He became isolated, trusting fewer and fewer people, believing only in his own judgment. This is the tragic flaw at the heart of our story. The genius began to believe his own myth. His first great mistake was the continental system. In an attempt to cripple his most stubborn enemy, Great Britain, he forbade all of continental Europe from trading with them. He wanted to bring the British economy to its knees. But the plan backfired spectacularly. It hurt European economies far more than it hurt Britain's, causing widespread resentment against French rule. It also led him into a disastrous, long-term war in Spain, which drained his resources and tied down hundreds of thousands of his best troops. The Spanish ulcer, as it was called, would bleed his empire dry. Then came the fatal error, the ultimate act of hubris, the invasion of Russia in 1812. The Tsar had defied the continental system, and Napoleon decided he must be punished. He assembled the Grande Army, the largest European army ever seen, over 600,000 men strong, and marched on Moscow. He believed it would be a quick, decisive campaign, just like all the others. He was wrong. The Russians refused to give him the battle he craved. Instead, they retreated, burning their own villages and crops as they went, practicing a scorched earth policy. Napoleon's army, used to living off the land, found nothing but ashes. He eventually reached Moscow, only to find it deserted and set ablaze by the Russians themselves. There was no one to surrender, no supplies to be had. Trapped in a burning city with the brutal Russian winter approaching, Napoleon had no choice but to order a retreat. The retreat from Moscow is one of the most horrific episodes in military history. The Grande Army was destroyed, not by battle, but by starvation, freezing temperatures, and relentless Cossack raids. Of the more than 600,000 men who marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 made it out. It was a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Napoleon had gambled everything and lost. His aura of invincibility was shattered forever. Sensing his weakness, the nations of Europe rose up against him. A new coalition of Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden, funded by Britain, formed to finally put an end to his reign. Despite fighting with flashes of his old brilliance, Napoleon's new army was a shadow of its former self, filled with raw, inexperienced recruits. He was overwhelmed. In 1814, Paris was captured, and Napoleon, the master of Europe, was forced to abdicate. He was exiled to the tiny island of Elba, off the coast of Italy. For his enemies, it was over. But they underestimated his charisma and his sheer force of will. Less than a year later, in a move that stunned the world, Napoleon escaped. He landed in France with a small band of followers and began marching toward Paris. The soldiers sent to arrest him, upon seeing their old emperor, threw down their arms and shouted "Vive l'Empereur!" His return to power, without a single shot being fired, was a testament to the incredible hold he still had on the hearts of the French people. This period, known as the 100 Days, was Napoleon's final, desperate gamble. The powers of Europe, terrified of his return, quickly assembled another massive army to crush him once and for all. The final showdown came in June 1815, near a small Belgian village called Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo was a close-run thing. Napoleon came incredibly close to victory, but a combination of dogged resistance by the British under the Duke of Wellington and the timely arrival of the Prussian army turned the tide. The Imperial Guard, Napoleon's elite, final reserve, was thrown into the fray and broke. The French army collapsed, and Napoleon fled the field. His empire, which he had regained so dramatically, was lost for good in a single day. This time, there would be no second chances. The British exiled him to St. Helena, a remote, windswept rock in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles from anywhere. It was here, a prisoner of his greatest enemies, that the man who had once ruled a continent would spend the last 6 years of his life, dictating his memoirs, crafting his own legend for posterity. He died in 1821, at the age of 51. So, what is the legacy of Napoleon Bonaparte? Was he a hero who modernized France and spread the ideals of the Revolution? Or a tyrant whose ambition led to millions of deaths and plunged a continent into war for over a decade? The truth is, he was both. He was a complex, contradictory figure, a brilliant strategist, and a far-sighted lawgiver, but also a ruthless dictator and an insatiable warmonger. His story is a timeless lesson on the nature of power and ambition. It shows us how the very same qualities that can propel a person to unprecedented heights of genius and success can, if left unchecked, lead to their ultimate ruin. Napoleon Bonaparte reached for the sun, and for a time, he seemed to hold it in his grasp. But in the end, like Icarus, he flew too close, and his own brilliance became the fire that consumed him. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the incredible life of Napoleon. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next historical deep dive. Let me know in the comments what you think. Was Napoleon a hero or a villain? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious.